Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got another disassembly video for you because people have been enjoying these, and frankly I enjoy making them. It's interesting, and I do love maintaining my tools, and this gives me a good excuse. So today I want to work on a very, very weird knife, and that's this little guy here, the Chris Reeve Knives TiLock. Which is one of my favorite EDC options. I got a lot of knives I absolutely love, but the TiLock is one of the ones that's just always there for me. And it's actually a very simple knife, but it's also very, very strange. And so I want to talk a little bit about that as I'm doing here. So first I'm going to go ahead and disassemble the back here. I'm going to go ahead and pop out both sides, because I know Chris Reeve is using good screws. It gives me a chance to clean under the Backspacer there. I don't feel the need to remove the clip on here, because it's nicely in there anyways. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that. So now I got to pull the pivot. And the pivot on this, one of the frustrations is that the pivot is free spinning, which means that if I just put this on here, it just kind of locks in there. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is on this side, use this wrench, and on the other side, use my just generic Allen bit set. It's not a great set. I'm not recommending it by any stretch. And then, come on now. There we go. Do a little bit of turning. And so, I mean, it's a little ridiculous to be turning the knife with the whole thing, but, you know, it did the trick. So here I am. And so, yeah. There we go. And we are popped loose. So you can see I used a little bit of Loctite in there. A little bit of Loctite remnant up inside there. Whoa there. And you can see that I've got the, this has got the larger pivot from some of the newer Chris Reeve knives, which is nice. And don't mind this, by the way. Not a problem. So now we have the blade is pretty much loose in there. I'm going to use this little driver here to pop the pivot out of the knife. Or at least I'm sure going to try. You know, it looks like I'm not going to do that after all. That's okay, though. So what I am going to try and do here is to open the knife. That way the blade is out of play, and I'm not actually going to hit the blade. And then I'm going to pop this guy apart using my little screwdriver here as a pry tool. And that way we are off the Backspacer, because you can see here that the Backspacer actually has a little collar in there that fits into that side of the scales. Now is the tricky part, and this is really the only tricky part of disassembling the TiLock, is managing this little barbel here. Because as you can see, this guy just scoots around the top, and it does actually have edges that hold the two scales together. So unlike in a lot of knives, most knives frankly, where once you remove the pivot screw, there's nothing keeping the knife together, this guy still has these barbels that are trying to keep the knife together. So I'm going to try and pop it apart a little bit like that, just to break some of the initial tension. And then I'm going to see if I can't pull the barbel off to the side. And so what I've done here is dislocated that little barbel. So it's no longer, I don't know if that's the right term, but I'm just going to use it. There we go. That's no longer holding the top scale on. And now, I'm hoping, there we go. And it popped apart. So, a little complicated, but that's okay. And now I'm going to see if I can't pop the pivot out, and the whole thing comes apart beautifully. And we see that the inside of this knife is actually very, very simple. There's not a whole lot going on here, and that's one of the reasons I love it so damn much. You have two scales with not a whole lot going on the inside here, just titanium. You have captive bearings right in here, in these little washers. You've got that on both sides. You have yourself a stop pin, which I believe is either peened or maybe soldered in on this side, or maybe it's just a really tight interference fit. But either way, this stop pin isn't going anywhere. And then finally, you've got the blade, and attached to the blade permanently is this little guy here. This top piece with the titanium is really, I think this may just be an interference fit, but it's a tight fit. So there's your blade, and that's how the whole darn thing works and is put together. You can see that the bearing race here is nicely, it's just milled right in there, and it's been worn clean over a fair amount of use. So I'm going to go ahead and just start cleaning. And this isn't so dirty. I think I probably cleaned this guy maybe a month or two ago. So, you know, it's not very dirty, but that's okay. And I'm just going to pop out the pin here. This is another nice sign of quality, is that you see that the, there we go. The backspacer is actually very nicely milled as well. And, you know, it has those collars, so it really does pop in there. It's not just wrapped around the screw or something. And the screws screw directly into the backspacer. Again, you can see, hopefully, that the inside of the backspacer is threaded. So, there we go. I'm going to go ahead and wipe down the inside here a little bit more. I do love the TiLock a lot. As I'm just wiping, I'll go ahead and talk. The TiLock is one of those knives that I almost didn't buy. And for a long time, I had convinced myself, oh, you're going to buy it, and then you're probably going to hate it, because it's weird. And I finally talked myself into it, because I found one at a decent enough price used. But, you know, I was not at all convinced by this knife, and most of the YouTube reviews were just not that helpful. You know, were full of superlatives and things like that. I mean, one guy, I forget who, I don't want to name names anyways, but one guy was saying things like, this is the best and the worst EDC blade ever, and, you know, terribly, fatally flawed, and things like that I don't agree with in the least, but people are saying them. So, you know, I almost didn't buy this guy, and I'm really super glad that I did, because it's very, very compelling. I'd use a Q-tip for this, but at the moment I don't have a Q-tip handy, and I'm feeling really good and lazy here on this beautiful Friday evening. So all I'm doing is wiping in here, getting the crud off the inside of there. So that's beautiful. And this knife is now ready to put back together. Oh, I'm going to go ahead and wipe off the outside of the pivot. It doesn't get that gunky, and certainly not in my life, but I'll go ahead and do that. So how do you put the knife back together? Well, first off, let's use a little bit of lube. One thing that's interesting about the TiLock from an action standpoint is that it's really not at all constrained. It's on bearings, which is part of the reason it's so smooth, but it doesn't need to be, because the TiLock mechanism is not a fall shut kind of smooth mechanism to start with. So I'm just wetting the bearing race here. And I'm not convinced that there is a right or wrong way to install, here we go, these washers. I believe they're just symmetrical, so I just drop them in there. And as I always do with bearings, I'm just going to try and rotate this guy within the bearing race a little bit here. Oh, come on now. And just make sure that all the bearings get a nice coating of oil, and there you go. That's good. Now I'm going to go ahead and drop the pivot through. And it actually doesn't super matter which side of the pivot goes on which side of the knife, really. It's a symmetrical pivot, more or less. Although it's not interiorly symmetrical, it's close enough for government work. So I'll go ahead and drop this guy through. Sometimes, especially on knives like Chris Reeve, where the tolerances are really tight, it's helpful to put a little bit of oil onto the pivot before you try and drop it through there. And sometimes it's also helpful to use, especially with the Allen key, to kind of use that to push it through. There we go. Come on now. This is a very, very tight fit. The tolerances here are incredible. There we go. And it's popped on through. And appears to be nicely seated. No problem. I'm going to go ahead and drop a little bit more lube on there. Why not? And I'm going to go ahead and then, while I got this here, clear out a little bit of schmutz and go ahead and put a little bit more oil. And drop in the bearings. Again, rotate those around a little bit so you get a little bit of oil across them. Now it's time to start the reassembly process. What I'm going to go ahead and do is, just to make my life a little bit easier, as I'm going through this, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the backspacer here before at least one of the sides of it. So take that. And, you know, I am going to use a little bit of Loctite because I don't take this guy apart very often, and, you know, why not, right? And again, I am using the blue Loctite. Even though it's in a red jar, this is blue. If you use red here, you're going to have a bad time. So I'm going to go ahead and just use my little oiler, which hopefully you can see is coated in blue Loctite. And apply a little bit to the inside there. I do kind of like Allen keys on knives, I'll say that much. They're fairly unusual. Torx has become the standard. and I can't say I'm 100% sure why. Not that they shouldn't be, but Allen keys are very nice to work with, and you tend to have upgraded depth, which I appreciate with them. So there we go. Now what we can do is drop the blade back in. Now, unfortunately, and I'm going to go ahead and apply, I'm running this really wet, but why not? I'm going to apply a little tiny bit of nano oil to the inside of the blade here. I'm just scraping it around there, and that'll just help it get over the, get onto the pivot and fall down. So what I'm going to do here is, and this is very, unfortunately you're applying a lot of force with your hands and you've got a sharp blade. So all I'm trying to do is wedge this guy, this barbel, up a little bit so that right now, hopefully you can see this, it's a little bit trapped. So I'm just trying to wedge this up and over. There we go. So now it's in. And we can see that the pivot's working just as fine with normal. As fine with normal, that's not speech. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and drop the other scale on here. Recall, we've already greased this side. Come on now. And again, it's a Chris Reeve, so some of the tolerances are going to be very tight. Getting the alignment proper such that this stop pin can pop in. And then you also get your backspacer popped in, and such that it picks up the little barbel here. Make sure that's in alignment is a little bit of a trick. So what I usually will do is use the scale itself to kind of lever things. So I'll try and get the stop pin in there first. Use the scale. See, watch what's going on with the barbel here. The scale will actually lift the barbel off a little bit here. Now, at that point, I should be well in alignment. So I can go ahead and pinch the back down just to kind of lock that in. And then I should, if I'm a lucky man, and maybe I am not today. There we go. It worked. I'll be damned. Even on camera. Now everything's popped back in. And so I can just check the action real quick. Nothing's 100% in there, but oh yeah, that's smooth. It's beautiful. No problem. So I just need to button up the last two bits here. Go ahead and apply a little bit of Loctite. That's maybe a little much. Just going to use a little tiny drip there. And, well, I've got a coating here. I'm going to go ahead and apply just another little bit to the inside of the threading here. There we go. Done. I am going to, well, I've got the right bit on the driver. Pop in the backspacer screw here. You can say a lot of nasty things about Chris Reeve knives. Well, not that many. But you can say some nasty things about them. But honestly, the disassembly process is beautiful for them. There are a few knives. If somebody hands me a knife to take apart, you know, compared to like your Boca Quaken, this is such a pleasure. And the Sabenzas and the Umnumzans are just so nice to take apart. They're built to be easily disassembled, and I love that so much. So there we go. Now I'm just plugging in the pivot screw here. And because this is not the Sabenza style with the bushing, you do need to make sure you're in the proper adjustment. So I'm making sure that everything opens and closes properly here. The Ti-Lock, like I said, is never going to be super smooth just because of the nature of the mechanism. But you want to make sure that everything is tight enough, but not so incredibly tight that you run into problems. Yeah, that looks fine. I'll try it once one-handed just so I get a sense of the tension here. Oh yeah, that's good. And so, because it's Loctited, that'll stay on in there. Beautiful. Then the final thing I'll point out, this isn't strictly speaking necessary, and depending on your pockets, this may be not ideal. But one thing that I'll usually do is just apply a little tiny bit of oil, and this is the heavier weight nano oil. Again, you don't need to do this, but I'm just applying a little tiny bit of oil to either side of this little surface because, as you can see here, come on now, the barbel will ride along that surface. And so that spreads out and just smooths things out a little bit more. Absolutely, completely unnecessary, and honestly, your pocket's going to rub that off first time there, but it just lets me coat the barbel a little bit more with something that'll reduce friction a little bit. So That's nice. And with that, the Chris Reeve Ti-Lock is fully reassembled. It's a knife on bearings that you would never guess are on bearings, just because the barbel action is very much not a, it doesn't feel bearingy, but it sure is. And it's just a joy, absolute joy, both to carry and to take apart and put back together. So, yeah, anyways, it's an interesting knife. I love it so much. This is one of those knives where if I lost it tomorrow, I would be buying a new one in a heartbeat just because it's just so damn nice. And, yeah, I hope this has been interesting to you and that you have yourself an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.